My name is Maya, and I am 28 years old. Until very recently, I would have described my family as slightly difficult, but manageable. The kind of family where tension simmers quietly under the surface, never quite boiling over. The kind where you learn early how to keep your expectations low and your reactions even lower. I believed that right up until the day my younger brother got married. My brother Jamal is 25. Growing up, he was always the center of gravity in our household. If something went wrong, it was explained away. If something went right, it was celebrated loudly. I was the older sibling, which meant I was expected to be steady, responsible, invisible when necessary. I learned how to do things on my own because no one ever seemed to worry whether I was being supported. Before we continued, if you're still here, write in the comments. Where are you watching us from? I'll read every message. That pattern never changed. It only got more subtle. So when Jamal announced his wedding, I told myself not to read into anything. It was his day, his life, his moment. I didn't expect to be in the spotlight. I just wanted to show up, sit with family, smile politely, and leave without tension following me home. The first sign came quietly. I wasn't asked to be part of the wedding party. At first, I didn't take it personally. Not every sibling stands beside the bride or groom. But then I noticed who was included. Jamal's college friend, his coworker, someone he met less than a year ago. Even a distant cousin's partner. People I barely knew were suddenly essential to the ceremony. I told myself it didn't matter. Then came the seating chart. The venue was elegant, warm lights reflecting off glass and polished floors. I walked up to the table near the entrance where name cards were arranged alphabetically. I scanned slowly. Parents, aunts, cousins, friends. My name wasn't there. I checked again. Then once more, carefully, as if I had simply overlooked it. Still nothing. I waited until the line behind me grew uncomfortable, then stepped aside and approached one of the event staff. She glanced at her tablet, frowned slightly, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're right this way." She led me forward, past the wide doors of the ballroom, past the sound of music and laughter, and stopped in the hallway just outside the main room, near the coat rack, near the restrooms. A small table sat alone against the wall, neatly set, almost apologetic in appearance. "This is your seat," she said softly. For a moment, I actually smiled. I thought it had to be temporary. A mistake. Something that would be fixed once the reception officially started. I asked her if she was sure. She nodded. That was when it sank in. I wasn't seated with family. I wasn't even seated in the room. I stood there for a long second, listening to the muffled music through the doors, feeling the cool draft from the entrance brush past my legs. I took a breath, straightened my dress, and decided to ask the one person who could explain this. My brother. I found Jamal near the front, laughing with his bride, Belle, who was glowing in white and gold. When they noticed me approaching, her smile sharpened slightly, like she already knew why I was there. I asked calmly, "Can you tell me why my seat is in the hallway?" Belle answered before Jamal could. She tilted her head, lips curling into something close to a smirk, and said, very clearly, "Only close family gets a table." And in that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. The words were simple, delivered lightly, almost casually, as if she were commenting on the weather instead of redefining my place in my own family. Jamal didn't say anything. He didn't look surprised either. He just shifted his weight slightly and avoided my eyes. I waited for him to correct her. He didn't. "Close family?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "I'm your sister." Brielle smiled again, that same controlled smile that never reached her eyes. Of course, she said. But seating was limited. We had to prioritize. I glanced past her into the ballroom. I could see empty chairs being adjusted, glasses being placed, servers moving between tables. Limited wasn't the word that came to mind. Jamal finally spoke. It's not a big deal, Maya. It's just a seat. Just a seat. Just a hallway. Just a quiet way of being pushed aside. Our mother appeared beside us then, drawn by the tension. She placed a hand on Jamal's arm and looked at me with that familiar expression. Half concern, half warning. Please, don't do this right now, she said softly. It's his wedding day. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone. I had only asked a question. Still, somehow, I was already the problem. I'm not trying to cause anything, I said. I just want to understand why I'm not sitting with the family. Brielle let out a small laugh. You don't really come around much anymore, she said. You've got your own life. It's different now. Different. That word again. The same word people use when they want distance without admitting it. I nodded slowly. So that's it? She shrugged. It's not personal, but it was, and we all knew it. I looked at Jamal one more time. He met my gaze briefly, then looked away. That was answer enough. I walked back toward the hallway table alone. The coat rack stood beside it, heavy with jackets and scarves. Guests passed by without noticing me, heading toward warmth and music while I sat just outside of it all. I told myself I could handle it. I had handled worse. Years of being overlooked had taught me how to sit quietly with discomfort and pretend it didn't matter. But as I sat there, listening to laughter through the doors, something shifted. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about respect. It was about being told, very clearly, that I didn't belong. A server stopped briefly and placed a glass of water in front of me. She hesitated, then gave me a sympathetic look before moving on. I wondered what she thought, what anyone would think, seeing a single table in a hallway with one person sitting at it. I took a slow sip and let my eyes drift toward the open doors. And that was when I realized something else. Brielle wasn't uncomfortable at all. She was watching me. Every now and then, her gaze flicked toward the hallway, checking to see if I was still there. Still sitting. Still accepting it. That was when I understood this wasn't just exclusion. It was intentional, and I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do about it. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to quietly disappear. I stayed where I was for a while, longer than I probably should have. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed time to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, heavier, the kind of realization that settles in slowly, the kind that forces you to revisit years of small moments you once dismissed. Holidays where my presence felt optional. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Decisions made without me, explained afterward as afterthoughts. I had always told myself I was imagining it. Now I knew I wasn't. I stood up and smoothed my dress, forcing my shoulders back. If I was going to be sidelined, I wasn't going to look small while it happened. As I walked back toward the ballroom entrance, I noticed a few guests glance at me with confusion. One woman frowned slightly, clearly trying to understand why anyone would be seated out there alone. Inside, the music swelled. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in waves. I stepped just inside the doorway, close enough to be seen, far enough to still feel separate. That was when Brielle approached me again. She moved with purpose, heels clicking softly against the floor, expression perfectly composed. Jamal stayed behind her, speaking to someone else, as if this had nothing to do with him. "I hope you're comfortable," she said, lowering her voice. There was something rehearsed about her tone, like she'd practiced sounding gracious. "I'm fine," I replied, and I meant it in the most literal way possible. I was standing. I was breathing. I wasn't causing a scene. She studied me for a moment, then leaned in slightly. "You know," she said, "weddings are about boundaries, about starting a new chapter with the people who matter most." I met her eyes. "And you decided I wasn't one of them?" Her lips curved upward, not denying it, not confirming it either. "Only close family gets a table," she repeated, softer this time, as if reminding me of my place. Something about the way she said it, slow, deliberate, made my chest tighten. I nodded once. "Understood." That seemed to satisfy her. She straightened, glanced toward the head table, then turned and walked away as if the conversation were closed. But for me, it wasn't. I looked around the room again, at the people seated comfortably, at the space that had been intentionally withheld from me. And then, unexpectedly, another thought surfaced. Brielle didn't look nervous. She didn't look unsure. She looked confident. Confident people don't usually poke at others unless they think they're safe from consequences. And that was when I remembered something. I had grown up with Jamal. I knew his habits, his stories, the things he complained about late at night when he thought no one else was listening. And more importantly, I knew what he had told me, more than once, about Brielle. I hadn't planned on saying anything. I truly hadn't. I came to this wedding prepared to endure, not to confront. But standing there, just inside the door, I realized something had already changed. I had been pushed out, publicly, deliberately. And suddenly, staying silent no longer felt like maturity. It felt like permission. I didn't move right away. I let the noise of the room wash over me, the music, the clinking glasses, the rehearsed happiness. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But once you know where to look, cracks are easy to see. Jamal was laughing too loudly. Brielle was holding his arm just a little too tightly. I stepped fully back into the room, not toward the hallway this time, but closer to the cluster of tables near the front. A few conversations quieted as I passed. People noticed. It's hard not to notice someone who looks like they're supposed to belong, but doesn't have a place to sit. That's when Brielle's mother leaned toward her and whispered something. Brielle's eyes flicked to me again. The smirk was gone now, replaced by calculation. I could have walked out. I could have taken the quiet exit and let them tell whatever story they wanted about why I left early. But something stopped me. All my life, I had been the one who absorbed discomfort so others wouldn't have to. I swallowed comments. I smoothed tension. I made myself smaller to keep the peace. And where had that gotten me? A table in a hallway. I approached the edge of the head table and paused. Jamal finally noticed me then. His smile faltered. "Maya," he said, "what's going on?" I kept my voice calm, almost gentle. "I just wanted to clear something up." Brielle stiffened beside him. "You said only close family gets a table," I continued, glancing briefly at her, then back to Jamal. "I just want to understand when I stopped counting." A few heads turned. The people closest to us leaned in, pretending not to listen while catching every word. Jamal opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Brielle, waiting for her to speak. She did. "We've been over this," she said, her tone sharper now. "This isn't the time." "I agree," I said. It would have been better to talk about it before seating me next to the coat rack. A ripple of quiet spread through the table. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Brielle's cheeks flushed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I replied. "I'm being specific." That was when I noticed it. The way her eyes darted around. The way her posture changed. She hadn't expected me to say anything. She had expected me to accept it. And suddenly, I realized something else. This wasn't just about me. This was about control. Brielle wanted to establish it early, on her wedding day, in front of everyone. She wanted to show where I ranked in this new version of the family. The problem was, she assumed I would play along. She assumed wrong. I took a slow breath. "I don't want to disrupt anything," I said evenly, "but I won't pretend this wasn't intentional." The room was very quiet now. Jamal finally spoke, his voice low. "Can we talk about this later?" I met his eyes. "We already are." And somewhere behind us, I heard a chair scrape against the floor as someone stood up, drawn in by the tension. The attention was shifting, and once it starts, it's hard to stop. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected it to. Long enough for people to stop pretending they weren't listening. Long enough for the music to feel too loud, then suddenly too quiet when someone near the DJ turned it down. Brielle was the first to recover. She let out a small laugh, the kind meant to signal that this was nothing, that I was overreacting. "This really isn't appropriate," she said. "Today is about Jamal and me." "I agree," I replied, "which is why I didn't bring this up. I was fine sitting quietly until you made it clear that my place was intentional." Jamal rubbed his face with one hand. He looked tired. Not confused, not shocked, just tired, and that hurt more than anger would have. "You could have just asked me," he said quietly. "I did," I answered, "and you let her answer for you." That landed. His jaw tightened. He looked at Brielle again, and for the first time that day, there was something uneasy in his expression. Brielle noticed it too. She straightened her shoulders. "I was just being honest," she said. "We had limited space. We made choices, that's all." "Choices say things," I replied. "Even when no one wants to admit it." Around us, guests had gone very still. A woman I recognized from our extended family glanced between Jamal and me, brows furrowed. Someone else leaned back slightly, clearly uncomfortable but unable to look away. Brielle crossed her arms. "So, what do you want? An apology? A chair?" I thought about that for a moment. "No," I said. "I wanted to know if this was how you really see me, and now I do." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making a scene." I smiled faintly. Funny, no one said that when I was being quietly humiliated. That was when Jamal's best man shifted beside him and muttered something under his breath. One of the bridesmaids glanced at Brielle, then quickly looked away. The energy in the room was changing, subtle but undeniable. Brielle could feel it slipping. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You weren't excluded, you were seated, just not at a main table." "In the hallway," I said calmly, "with the coats." Someone near the back let out a soft, involuntary laugh. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Brielle's face hardened instantly. She turned to Jamal. "Are you really going to let this happen?" He hesitated. That hesitation said everything. For the first time since I arrived, I felt something solid settle in my chest. Not rage, not satisfaction, clarity. I wasn't fighting for a seat. I was witnessing a truth. And Brielle was realizing that her quiet little power move had just become very, very public. Brielle took a step closer to Jamal, her hand sliding onto his arm again, this time not affectionate, but possessive. She leaned in and whispered something to him, sharp and quick. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. His shoulders stiffened immediately. Maya, he said, turning back to me. Can you just drop this? There it was. Not is this wrong? Not, are you okay? Just drop it. I nodded slowly. I already did, I said, back when I sat down where you put me. That answer didn't please either of them. Brielle exhaled sharply. You're acting like we committed some huge offense. You didn't forget my seat, I replied. You chose it. She opened her mouth to argue again, but someone else spoke first. I'm sorry. A woman's voice cut in, hesitant but clear. One of the bridesmaids. She looked uncomfortable, eyes flicking between Brielle and me. I thought family usually sat together. The words were soft, but they landed like weight. Brielle's head snapped toward her. This is not your concern. The bridesmaid flushed and stepped back, but the damage was done. The thought was now out in the open. People were thinking it, even if they weren't saying it. I hadn't planned to speak again, truly. But the air felt charged now, and silence would only help one side. I don't want to take over your wedding, I said evenly. I came here to support my brother. I stayed quiet until I was told, directly, that I didn't count as close family. Brielle's voice rose. Because you don't act like it? That was new. I tilted my head slightly. Explain. You're distant, she said, her words coming faster now. You're not around. You're not involved. You don't even try. Family shows up. I nodded once, absorbing that. I did show up, she scoffed. Physically sure. Jamal looked between us, tension etched into his face. Both of you, please. But Brielle wasn't done. This is exactly what I meant, she said. You always do this. You make things uncomfortable and then act innocent about it. I felt a quiet shift inside me. Something clicked into place. No, I said calmly. I make things visible. She stared at me, clearly not liking that answer. Around us, people were openly watching now. Conversations had stopped entirely at nearby tables. The DJ stood frozen, hands hovering over his equipment, unsure whether to restart the music. Brielle's voice dropped, tight with irritation. You should just leave if you're this unhappy. I met her gaze. I will, but not because I'm embarrassed. That seemed to catch her off guard. I glanced once more at Jamal. I hope this was worth it, I said quietly. Because moments like this don't disappear once the music comes back on. For a split second, something like doubt flickered across his face. Then Brielle squeezed his arm again. And just like that, it was gone. I turned slightly, preparing to walk away, when I noticed how tense Brielle had become. Her confidence had shifted into something sharper, more brittle. She had expected obedience. What she was getting instead was attention she could no longer control. As I stepped back, she spoke again, louder this time. You know, she said, her voice carrying farther than before. This is exactly why we didn't want you at a main table. I stopped. The room seemed to lean in. I turned back slowly. And why is that? She lifted her chin. Because you have a habit of making things about yourself. You always have. That was the moment something inside me went very still. For years I had swallowed that accusation. Anytime I spoke up, it was framed as drama. Anytime I expressed discomfort, it became selfishness. I had learned how to disappear so well that people forgot it was a choice. I looked at her carefully. I've been sitting alone in a hallway for most of the night, I said. I didn't say a word until you told me I wasn't close family. If that's making it about myself, Then maybe we have different definitions. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brielle's eyes flicked around again, measuring reactions. She didn't like what she saw. Jamal cleared his throat. Can we please move past this? I studied him for a long second. We could have, I said, but you didn't stop it when it mattered. His shoulders sagged slightly. He didn't argue. That silence was louder than anything else. Brielle laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. This is ridiculous. People are staring. They started staring when you decided to seat me like a problem instead of a person, I replied. Someone near the back shook their head quietly. Another guest leaned toward their partner and whispered something I couldn't hear. Brielle's face flushed deeper. I was trying to protect the atmosphere. No, I said. You were testing boundaries. She stiffened. Excuse me? You wanted to see how much you could get away with, I continued, my voice calm, almost conversational. You wanted to see if I would accept being minimized in public. Jamal looked sharply at her now. Brielle! She cut him off. Don't. That single word did more damage than she realized. A few people exchanged looks. The bridesmaid who had spoken earlier stared down at her hands. Someone at the edge of the room shifted their chair, clearly uncomfortable. Brielle had lost the room, and she knew it. She turned back to me, eyes cold. If you're done, you should go. I nodded. I am done. But I wasn't finished. I took a step toward the exit, then stopped again. Not because I wanted to prolong the moment, but because something important had just surfaced in my mind. Brielle had been very confident tonight. Confident enough to humiliate me openly. Confident enough to assume I would stay quiet. Confident enough to think there would be no consequences. People only act that way when they believe they're untouchable. I turned back once more, slower this time. Not confrontational. Not emotional. Just deliberate. Before I go, I said, there's something I want to clarify. Brielle rolled her eyes. Of course there is. I ignored her tone and looked instead at Jamal. You and I grew up together, I said, which means I've heard you talk. A lot. His expression tightened immediately. Brielle's posture changed. Subtle, but noticeable. She straightened, alert now. I wasn't planning to say anything, I continued. I came here to be polite, to celebrate you. But since we're being honest tonight, I think it's fair to stop pretending. What are you talking about? Brielle asked sharply. I turned to her, meeting her gaze evenly. You know how you said only close family gets a table? She nodded, chin raised. I smiled faintly. It's interesting, because Jamal has spent months telling me how stressed he was about this wedding, especially about how certain people might behave. Jamal swallowed. Maya. I kept my eyes on Brielle. He was worried about speeches, about appearances, about comments being made that might ruin the vibe. Brielle's smile vanished. That's not true. I shrugged lightly. Those were his words. He said he hoped no one would make things uncomfortable, that some people had a habit of drawing attention to themselves. A hush settled over the nearest tables. Brielle's eyes flicked to Jamal. Did you say that? He didn't answer right away. I continued gently. He also mentioned how hard it was for him to keep the peace at home. How exhausting it was to constantly smooth things over. How he felt like he was always walking on eggshells. That one landed. Brielle's face hardened. You're lying. I finally looked at Jamal again. Am I? He looked away. The reaction around us shifted instantly. People weren't just watching anymore. They were connecting dots. Brielle's confidence cracked just enough for irritation to seep through. This is inappropriate. I agree, I said. But so is seating me in a hallway and calling it family policy. Her jaw clenched. You're trying to embarrass me. No, I replied calmly. I'm explaining why your words mattered. For the first time that evening, Belle looked uncertain. And uncertainty, once exposed, has a way of spreading. Belle took a sharp breath, the kind people take when they're trying to keep control of their voice. You're twisting things, she said. You're taking private conversations and turning them into drama. I nodded. That's one way to see it. Jamal finally spoke, his voice low. Maya, stop. I looked at him, really looked at him. You asked me to drop it earlier, I said. I did. You didn't. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Belle turned fully toward him now. Is any of this true? He hesitated, just for a moment, but that moment was enough. It's not like that, he said. I was just stressed. I didn't mean. She pulled her arm away from him. The gesture was small, but the shift was obvious. So you have been complaining about me, she said. Jamal's mouth opened, then closed again. I vented. Everyone vents. About me, she repeated, to your sister. Around us, the room felt frozen. People were openly staring now. No one was pretending anymore. I spoke again, carefully. He told me you hated feeling judged, that you were worried people would criticize your choices, that you were afraid someone might make it all about themselves. Belle let out a short, humorless laugh. Wow! She looked at Jamal with something close to disbelief. So this is what you think of me? That's not what I said, he insisted. But you said something. She shot back. I took a step back, giving them space. I wasn't here to fight their battle. I had already said enough. Belle turned to the nearest table, then back to us. So let me get this straight, she said loudly. I'm the villain because I didn't want negative energy at my wedding? No one answered. Silence can be devastating when you're expecting support. She turned back to me, eyes sharp. You enjoyed this. I considered that honestly. No, I said. I didn't enjoy any of it, but I won't pretend it didn't matter. Her gaze flicked to the hallway, to the small table still sitting there, empty now. The visual did more than any argument could. One of the older relatives near the back cleared her throat. I've never seen a sibling seated outside the room before, she said quietly. Brielle's face flushed. This is getting ridiculous. Jamal looked shaken now, not angry, not defensive, shaken. I think we need a minute, he said to Belle. She stared at him. You're choosing this? I'm choosing to talk, he replied. That distinction mattered more than he realized. I took another step back. I'm going to leave, I said. Not because I was asked to, because I've said what I needed to say. No one stopped me this time. As I turned toward the exit, the tension behind me felt heavy, unresolved, and very public. And I knew something else, too. The wedding wasn't going to simply continue like nothing had happened. Some things, once exposed, refused to stay buried. I walked toward the exit slowly, aware of every step, every glance that followed me. The music hadn't started again. No one tried to stop me. That silence stayed with me all the way through the doors and into the cooler air outside the ballroom. Once I reached the hallway, I paused beside the small table that had been assigned to me. The glass of water was still there, untouched now. The place card with my name sat neatly in front of an empty chair. For a moment, I just looked at it. It struck me how deliberate it all had been. The placement, the wording, the confidence with which Belle had said what she said. That hadn't been a mistake made under stress. That had been a decision. I picked up my purse and turned away from the table for the last time. As I walked down the corridor toward the main exit, I could hear raised voices starting behind the closed ballroom doors, not clear enough to make out words, but sharp enough to tell the tone had shifted. Whatever calm Brielle had tried to preserve was gone now. Outside, the night air felt heavy but grounding. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, like I'd been holding it in for years without realizing. My phone buzzed almost immediately, a text from my mother. "Why would you do this tonight?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone without responding. I wasn't ready to explain myself to someone who had watched me be sidelined my entire life, and only noticed when I finally stopped accepting it. I had barely reached my car when another message came through. This time from Jamal. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the driver's door, eyes closed, phone resting loosely in my hand. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me knew this conversation had been overdue for a long time. "Not tonight," I typed back. "You made your choice tonight. We'll talk later." There was no reply. As I drove away from the venue, the lights in my rearview mirror grew smaller. I wondered how long it would take before the full weight of the evening settled in for everyone still inside. Weddings have a way of exposing fault lines people work very hard to hide. And once they're visible, pretending they don't exist becomes impossible. I didn't know what the fallout would look like yet, but I knew this much. I had finally stepped out of the hallway. I didn't sleep much that night. My phone stayed face down on the nightstand, but I could feel it vibrating every few minutes, like a persistent pulse. Messages, missed calls, voicemails I didn't have the energy to hear yet. By morning, I finally checked. My mother had left several messages. Her tone shifted with each one, confused, upset, pleading, then frustrated. The common thread was clear. Somehow, what happened at the wedding had become my responsibility to fix. Jamal had sent one more message just after midnight. "Brielle is really upset. This got out of hand." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Got out of hand, as if it had been a spill, an accident. Something no one could have anticipated. I didn't reply. Later that day, my father called. He rarely got involved in family conflict. When he did, it usually meant something had gone very wrong. "Maya," he said after a pause. "I heard what happened." I waited. "I don't agree with how you were treated," he continued slowly. "But the timing? There's never a good time to be told you don't count," I replied quietly. He sighed. "I know." That was it. No lecture, no demand for an apology. Just that acknowledgement. It was more than I'd expected. Over the next few days, bits and pieces filtered back to me. The reception never fully recovered. People noticed the tension. Conversations shifted. Brielle had disappeared for a while with Jamal. Some guests left early. Apparently, the phrase she'd used, "only close family gets a table," had circulated faster than anyone anticipated. Once words like that are spoken publicly, they don't belong to just one person anymore. Jamal called again 2 days later. This time, I answered. "We're not okay," he admitted. "Brielle feels humiliated." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "She humiliated herself. She thinks you planned it," he said, "that you wanted to embarrass her." "I wanted to sit with my family," I replied. "Everything after that was a reaction?" There was a long silence on the line. "She says you crossed a line," he said finally. "I know," I answered, "and she crossed it first." He didn't argue. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about a single night anymore. This was about a dynamic that had finally been challenged. And once challenged, It couldn't simply return to what it was before. Over the next week, the story of the wedding shifted depending on who was telling it. In my mother's version, emotions ran high and misunderstandings happened. In Brielle's version, I had deliberately sabotaged her day. In Jamal's version, everything had spiraled before he could stop it. No one mentioned the hallway table unless I brought it up. That omission told me everything. Jamal came by my apartment a few days later. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept enough but hadn't rested either. We sat across from each other, the silence heavy but not hostile. "She wants you to apologize," he said eventually. "For what?" I asked. "For embarrassing her, for bringing private things into public." I folded my hands in my lap. "Does she want to apologize for saying I wasn't close family?" He looked down. "She doesn't think she needs to." "That's the problem," I replied. He rubbed his forehead. "She says if you just admit you overreacted, we can all move on." I shook my head slowly. Moving on without accountability just means it happens again. Maybe not to me, maybe to someone else. He didn't respond right away. When he finally looked up, his expression was conflicted. I didn't realize how bad it was until everyone started talking. "That's usually how it goes," I said. "Silence protects patterns." When he left, nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. He couldn't unsee it now, and neither could I. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for holding my ground. Weeks passed. The calls slowed. The messages became shorter, more careful. Family gatherings were postponed. No one wanted to be the first to bring everything back into the open. I heard through relatives that Brielle was still angry. Not loud anger, controlled anger, the kind that waits. She told people I was difficult, that I'd always been distant, that I didn't understand boundaries. I didn't correct the narrative. I had spent too many years explaining myself to people who only listened when it benefited them. Jamal and I spoke occasionally, cautiously. Our conversations stayed on the surface. Work, weather, neutral ground. But underneath it all, there was a question neither of us asked out loud. What does family mean when it's conditional? I thought about that a lot, about how easy it is to mistake tolerance for peace, about how often women are taught that grace means silence. I had lost my seat at a table that night, but I had gained clarity, and clarity has a way of rearranging priorities. A month after the wedding, my mother invited me to coffee. She looked older than I remembered, not physically, but in the way people do when they're forced to confront something they've avoided for years. "I didn't realize how alone you felt," she said quietly. I stirred my drink without looking up. "I didn't either, not until it was obvious." She nodded. "I should have said something that day." "Yes," I replied, not harshly, not gently, just honestly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. I didn't know what my relationship with Jamal and Brielle would look like in the future. Maybe it would heal, maybe it wouldn't. Some damage doesn't reverse neatly. But I knew this much. I would never again accept a seat in the hallway of my own life. Time has a way of settling things into their proper places. The wedding became a story people stopped retelling. Jamal and Brielle settled into their marriage, carrying with them the consequences of that first public test. I stayed where I was, steady, no longer bending to keep things comfortable for everyone else. I didn't regret speaking up. If you listened to the end, thank you. It means more to me than you know. And before we finish, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps our channel grow and allows us to release new stories every single day. Sometimes, the moment that changes everything isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stand up, walk away, and refuse to be placed where you don't belong. And once you do that, there's no going back. For another story that fits your mood, click the video on the left. To hear the latest one, choose the video on the right.